Secretary Cohen, let me ask you a simple question. If you had tucked even one top secret document into your briefcase when you were defense secretary and taken it home with you, what would have been the consequences?
Well, if I had still been in office, I think the consequences would have been limited. But the practice was for me never to take anything home. Every time I touched a top secret document in my office or in the car, the limousine taking me to the office, it was always under watch of someone in the car, and I had to turn it over immediately upon going into the Defense Department. So I might have had a document at my home, provided there was someone there to take it back to the Pentagon where it could be safeguarded. But once I left the Pentagon, there was no taking anything home.
And so what is your reaction when you just hear the details, the list of the hundreds of classified documents, the latest reporting from the Washington Post that Donald Trump, now a private citizen out of office, had all this at his beach resort in Florida?
I think you've been asking the question, why? I don't think it matters why. The fact that he had those documents in his possession is offense enough. Subject to perhaps criminal prosecution. If I had had those in my house after leaving office, I would be in handcuffs by this time. And so I think the Justice Department has gone out of its way to show deference to the former president that no other president in the history would have behaved in this fashion or had behaved in this fashion. So I think the Justice Department is going about it very methodically, very deferentially. I think that time has come to an end. I go back to the January 6th committee, where it was Judge, I think his name was Luttig, a very conservative judge. He said that Donald Trump was a clear and present danger to democracy. That is confirmed over and over by these revelations. The notion that the former president had documents, highly classified documents in his possession in unsafe circumstances or any circumstances, puts our nation at risk, potentially. So I think there's no justification. There's no way they can say, oh, it was a mistake. I think that's been disproved. And anyone who says that, I think, is flat out lying.
Mr. Secretary, you've had years of long service to the United States, and we thank you for that, in the United States Senate as well as Secretary of Defense. And you've recently co-signed a letter with several other former Secretaries of Defense outlining the need for really strict civilian control of the military, keep the military out of politics. My question to you is, were you surprised at all during the past 5 years that more former Secretaries of Defense or more former retired generals or whatever rank they had in the military service did not speak out during the Trump presidency about what they knew and saw and heard and witnessed is severe, severe lack of control of the President of the United States?
I was not surprised, because those in the military, especially those who deal at this level of security information, they are not inclined to speak out unless it becomes so egregious that they have no choice but to either speak out but resign. You saw that with General Mattis, Secretary Mattis. He came to the point where he said, I can no longer serve this president. I think it takes a lot for a Marine of Jim Mattis's record and heroism to say that I can't carry out this mission any longer because my worldview is quite different than what the president was doing. So most of those in the military, they are taught and trained and disciplined to follow the lead and the orders of the President of the United States unless they deem them to be either illegal or so egregious that they can't, in good conscience, carry out the order. So it doesn't surprise me. It surprises me now that so many are stepping forward. If you go back on this, Mike, right after the election, there were 10 former Secretaries of Defense who wrote an open letter to the Defense Department saying, don't get involved in partisan politics. Because you may recall at that time there were rumors coming from Michael Flynn and others that the Insurrection Act should be invoked so that the then president, could take over the voting machines and alter the election. 10 former Secretaries of Defense at that time. We're in a letter-writing campaign because just about a year ago, almost 100 national security officials, military and civilian, again wrote an open letter that the January 6th insurrection constituted an undermining of democracy throughout the world, that we are being undermined ourselves, doing it to ourselves, for other countries to look and say, I guess democracy is not a role model we want to follow. A week or so ago, Judge William Webster, former CIA director, FBI director, former appellate judge, contacted me and said, can we write an op-ed to talk about what is happening to this country, that the President of the United States is putting a target on the backs of our FBI agents. We need to speak out against that. And now finally comes this most recent letter that was initiated by General Martin Dempsey, because he said, we are in exceptionally treacherous waters, and we need to clarify what the nature of this relationship is between our civilian leaders and our military. And it was just a 16-point presentation that you would give to a high school class. It was necessary to give that because what President Trump, and again, this was not directed specifically at him, but I'm speaking for myself now, it is clear to me that President Trump is doing grave damage to that civilian-military relationship, and I think it was necessary. They felt, 5 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs felt compelled to join 8 former secretaries of defense, and I think that was unprecedented.
Mr. Secretary, I want to underline something, and you can do it so much better than I've been able to do. I was just a member of the House of Representatives on the Armed Services Committee. We would get briefings, classified briefings, and we always understood. And it was made very clear that if we revealed that there would be legal consequences. My God, if we took a document and I took it back to my office or took it home, we had every reason to believe the FBI would be knocking on my Washington apartment door within a day. And I would be questioned. And so here you've repeated the same thing, but I just, it's important for me to ask you it in this way, because we do have people that watch this show that voted for Donald Trump, that support Donald Trump, that still think that somehow this is a deep state conspiracy against Donald Trump, that your letter, that there's all some sort of deep state fight against Donald Trump, when in fact, all we're talking about is the fact that the law should apply to everyone equally, equal justice under the law. You were a member of the Bangor City Council. You were a member of the United States House of Representatives. You were a member of the United States Senate. You were Secretary of Defense. On all levels, if you had taken a fraction of what Donald Trump removed from a government building of government documents, secret documents, classified documents, top secret documents, could you please explain how you, our former CIA directors, or former heads of the National Security Agency would be thrown in jail?
Yes, I think anyone other than the former president, currently at least, would be behind bars for doing any of what you just outlined. I want to go back to, or just raise the issue about this notion that the former president just waved a wand as if he's a Jedi warrior and declassified all of this information. I want everybody to think about this. We spend, and the number's pretty easy to remember, $777.7 billion on national security, on our Defense Department. Of that almost $780 billion, a good chunk of that also is for the collection of information, intelligence. Because we have the finest fighting force in the world, but as good as we are, if we are blind or can't hear, that fighting force is in grave peril. So we need all-around vision, all-around hearing in order to know where we are in the world, what is coming at us, from what direction. And the notion that a president could say, I'm declassifying it all, and give that information to the North Koreans, to his friend, President Putin, to the Chinese, to Iran, that's absurd. that he would carry information. I've totally declassified it. So you're opening up a $777 billion budget to your adversaries? It's absurd.
So, Mr. Secretary, I'm curious, just can the DOJ wait for a special master to sift through all this? I mean, you mentioned the egregiousness of what has been discovered so far, and I can't think of anything. Can you think of anything more illegal, egregious, and dangerous to our country than a loose-lipped former president having nuclear information on a foreign country? I mean, isn't this something that requires swift action?
Well, as I mentioned before, the Justice Department is going very cautiously on this, given the political world that we're living in. In that letter that was initiated by General Dempsey and others, he said we're in exceptionally treacherous waters. And so we are trying to take into account the political environment in which we're now being forced to operate. It's never happened like this before. I think you go back to the days of Joe McCarthy. This is Joe McCarthyism on steroids. No president in the history of our country has ever deliberately tried to attack and undermine the institutions of law enforcement, certainly of the FBI, of the Justice Department, of our intelligence community. Don't forget, former President Trump undermined the entire intelligence community in favor of Russian President Putin. So the damage is being done and has been done, and that's why I quoted from Judge Ludwig, who said that the former president constitutes a clear and present danger to democracy and to this country.